Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, of course, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Westwood One NFL analyst. And then he sent me this bombshell this morning, this tweet. Are people nationally aware that the Steelers, Eagles, Penn State, etc., and their opponents will evidently be required to wear masks while they're playing in Pennsylvania from now on? Let's start there, Ross. You got my attention.
Yeah, how are you, Dan? Thank you for having me. I'm back in your favorite place, by the way, West Point, New York.
Nice.
Georgia Southern and Army tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Yeah, so as you can see from my shirt, my high school's in the state semifinal tomorrow. So I've been following this closely. And on Wednesday, Governor Tom Wolf had 4 new mandates to help slow the spread of the coronavirus. One of which was, evidently, you now have to wear masks inside if you have someone over to your house, but also any athletic competition, during the athletic competition, evidently you have to have a mask on. And what's kind of funny about it, Dan, is later that day, this has all happened Wednesday. Later that day, I think the Steelers said, we have an exemption for that. So then yesterday, the news people asked the governor's office, do the Steelers have an exemption? And the governor's office said, no, they don't have an exemption. Nobody has an exemption. So right now, the understanding is everyone in the state of Pennsylvania during athletic competition will be required to wear a mask. However, I've seen the local PIAA say it's really up to the school districts and their solicitors to decide how they handle it. So it's very, very interesting. And what I don't like about it, Dan, is anytime you talk about something like this, it feels like it gets political, right? You know, on the one hand, I don't think wearing a mask or a gaiter is that big a deal. I've talked to some college kids at Miami, Ohio, or whatever. They've worn one in practice all year. On the other hand, we now have, between Australia and Europe and the United States, thousands and thousands of games. And there's still no evidence of transmission during play. So it doesn't really seem like this mandate would actually be following the science or the data. So it's a bit of a conundrum.
Okay, the Steelers and Eagles, I think, are both on the road. So they would have a week to work this out if this is going to be implemented with the NFL. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Steelers thought it already was worked out. They play Thanksgiving against the Ravens Thanksgiving night. There are high school playoff games tonight, and I think Penn State, Pitt, and Temple might all have home games tomorrow. So I don't know. I mean, it's on TV. You know, I'm sure that some of these games they can say, well, we're not wearing it. They're not going to, it's hard to enforce. But when you're on TV, they kind of have pretty good evidence that you're not doing it.
Yeah. Well, then you have the situation with the Raiders. The Raiders have 11 players who have tested positive. They have this game against Kansas City. Why hasn't this game been moved? It felt like when Stephon Gilmore tested positive for the Patriots, they moved their Thursday night game. How are they going to be, like, at what point is it too many players for the Raiders to be able to play this game against Kansas City?
Yeah, so my understanding, Dan, and I might be wrong on this, is that most of those guys are just close contacts of one person that tested positive. So I think a lot of them are going to come off the COVID list tomorrow and Sunday. So I think most of those guys should be able to play Sunday night. They just haven't been able to practice all week. And the NFL has decided that that is okay. That's acceptable for guys to not practice but still playing the games. Heck, it worked for Roethlisberger last week for the Steelers. And there's no more bye weeks, Dan. I mean, there's no more opportunity. I think at some point, there's no doubt in my mind, the NFL went from, hey, there's a couple guys that can't play. We should, try to reschedule it to, you know what? This is just going to be part of it. This is part of the competitive situation this year. Don't be a high-risk contact. Don't do things that cause you to get COVID, and we're just going to roll with it.
If you were an offensive lineman on the Saints, would you rather have Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill for this weekend's game?
I haven't seen Taysom Hill play quarterback enough to really be able to answer that. I guess I'd probably rather have Jameis. I think that he'd probably be able to get rid of the ball quicker, but I don't know about that. I do know this, though, Dan. I think it's interesting. The Saints gave Taysom Hill a 1-year extension as a restricted free agent. That's $21 million between last year and this year. I kind of assumed or thought that that was because they thought he had a great chance to be the heir apparent to Drew Brees. But now this will be the second year in a row that Drew Brees gets hurt, and they're putting in another quarterback instead of him. I guess they value him that much as a gadget guy. And also, because Jameis is only under contract for 1 year, they wanted to make sure they had at least one option under contract for 2021. I guess I understand that.
He's Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, Ross Tucker football podcast, and an analyst for Westwood One. Also on the call this Saturday at noon, Georgia Southern at West Point. All right, let me go to the Thursday night game. What we saw with Seattle's defense stood out more than anything else. Is this a one-off, or is this how Seattle is going to be trying to play the rest of the season?
You know what? They've actually been pretty decent on defense 3 out of the last 4 games. With the exception of that Buffalo Bills game, Seattle has played better on the defensive side of the ball. We saw Carlos Dunlap, who they got from the Bengals, was a huge factor in the game last night. And I do think it's funny. Greg Cosell from NFL Films and I were debating this on the Ross Tucker podcast this morning. I do think, Greg, when they run the ball, when they run the ball a little bit and keep the defense fresh on the sideline, that it does help them. I think they realize that just trying to have Russell Wilson be the hero and throw 4 or 5 touchdown passes every week, it's really, really hard to do. So running the ball a little bit helps Russell, and it's not as many snaps for the defense, and that D-line was able to get after Kyler Murray a lot better as a result.
And Troy Aikman during the game said defenses aren't going to just sit back and let Kyler Murray kind of dictate, that maybe defenses are going to start to go all out, put a little more pressure on him. And Seattle did that. They disrupted his pocket a little bit more, and they sort of dictated if he was going to run, when he was going to run, and if he was going to throw. It's easier said than done, but can you see that as a blueprint moving forward with defenses with Kyler?
Absolutely. Look, if you just let him drop back and pass, A, he's a really good passer, but B, there will eventually be a seam, and he will find it, and he's the quickest quarterback, one of the quickest NFL players I have ever seen.
Yeah.
He's going to find it. I think the philosophy a little bit is go get him before he gets you. And really, both he and the Cardinals, boy, they had some critical errors last night. I mean, think about the end of the first half, right? He slides a yard short of the first down on 2nd and 4. Otherwise, they would have kept the ball. They probably would have gotten a field goal at the end of that. Then 3rd down, he doesn't give it to Kenyon Drake. They have to punt, and the Seahawks get a field goal at the end of the first half. Then, late in the game, he has that critical intentional grounding. The next play is a holding penalty in the end zone for a safety by Sweezy. That was 5 points that really came down to what I would consider mental errors by Kyler Murray.
Why is the sports media so obsessed with Carson Wentz?
I'm probably the wrong person to answer this because I live outside of Philadelphia and I do Eagles TV and Eagles radio. So, that's all I know. I didn't know it was national. I know that's the way it is in Philadelphia for sure. I think for whatever reason, he's become a really polarizing player. 2017, he probably would have been the MVP of the league and they might have won the Super Bowl with him, but they didn't. So he doesn't get credit for that. And it feels like he's kind of gotten a little bit worse each year. And this year, certainly he has struggled. So now, and then the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, which added intrigue to the situation. So there are people, it's a really interesting thing, Dan. I know you know this, right? But it's hard to get people to come off their original take or their original opinion of someone. And so many people went in on the Carson Wentz top 5 quarterback, Carson Wentz MVP, that they're going to fight that. They're going to hold on to that. as long as they can, even though unfortunately for the Eagles, he clearly has not been that guy this year.
But how much blame do we put on him? And is Jalen Hurts an upgrade if you put him in there now?
So I think that Wentz deserves a lot of blame this year. And I'm a big fan of his personally and professionally. They've had a lot of guys out, but he's had so many turnovers this year, so many really ugly, surprising turnovers where he's trying to do too much. But the thing that, Dan, is probably the scariest for the Eagles and Eagles fans, last Sunday against the Giants, Miles Sanders was back, Alshon Jeffrey was back, Lane Johnson was back, and by the way, Carson Wentz didn't turn it over. I mean, he didn't turn it over, so there was no sort of a crutch or excuse for why the Eagles lost. They just got beat. I mean, the Giants were just better. The Giants were just the better team in that game. They won by 10. So all of the sort of built-in excuses about injuries or turnovers, they all went out the window. So now Eagles fans are kind of like, wait a minute, now what? Now are we just not good?
I love the way the Giants play. They may not be a great team, but they play hard. And it feels like every week they're getting better. I don't know if they steal this division, but nothing would surprise me in the NFC East. I just don't think the Eagles are a good team right now. I don't think they're well coached right now. The Cowboys are a mess right now. Washington's a mess. And here are the Giants without Saquon Barkley, and they might be the best team in the division the second half of the season.
I agree. They certainly were on Sunday. They've lost so many close games. Joe Judge has them in every game. They easily could have 5 or 6 wins right now. When you think about all the Cowboys game and the Bucks game, I mean, all these close losses, Joe Judge done a nice job with that team. The defense is much improved. Daniel Jones 2 games in a row without turning it over. Right now, I think they are the best team in the NFC East. The only thing I would say, and I've been saying this all week, is this is exactly when the Eagles win. I mean, 4 years in a row, 2017, 18, 19, just when all the Eagles fans are like, I'm done with them, I'm not watching anymore, the season's over, they somehow win when you least suspect it and figure out a way to win the division or go to the playoffs and maybe even make a run. So we'll see. Big game against Cleveland on Sunday.
Great to talk to you, Ross. Thank you. Enjoy West Point, Army against Georgia Southern coming up at noon Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Thank you, buddy.
My pleasure, always.
That's Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, and the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, where you can learn something. Westwood One NFL analyst.